Well, I'm glad to be here. I came on my bike. It's absolutely true. I will be speaking about the bonobo and the atheist. Can we get the lights, especially the ones in front, down? And I realize that atheism in Holland means something else than atheism in the US. In the US, it means you go straight to hell, basically. I don't think that's the case here. So you're safe, probably. There is this old view in biology. So the biologists have been very much involved in this debate as well. There's this old view that nature is a place of competition. Nature red in tooth and claw, which is a line from Tennyson, a poet. And nature red in tooth and claw is the way we teach biology, and still many people teach biology that way. But nature has a lot of cooperation going on, and the wolf is in fact a cooperative animal, and wolves, of course, do cause a lot of bloodshed, but that's mostly on prey items, not on each other, and we make a sharp distinction in biology, whether you do it on your own species or some other species. So this is sort of the view, is that natural selection is a horrific process. I mean, it's a process of elimination. That's how natural selection basically works, is that you have a bunch of genes in the population, and the phenotypes that they produce, some of them survive and some of them don't survive. But that's not all done, we call it the struggle for life, but that's not all done by direct competition. In fact, direct competition is probably only a minor part of it, because if you have a better immune system, or you have better ears, you can hear better, or you're better at finding food, those are things that also big advantages, and those individuals will survive while others don't survive. And so a lot of this differential survival, which is what natural selection basically is, a lot of that has nothing to do with struggle in the sense of out-competing somebody else. So an individual that looks very weak in terms of muscle power and teeth and whatever, but has a better immune system than everybody else, that individual is going to make it. So we sometimes mistake struggle for life for a real struggle. Now, as a result, we have sort of two views in biology of morality. One is that nature is nasty, so morality cannot really exist. Morality is a veneer, or is a cultural invention, or is a religious product, or morality is not really part of nature. And then the other view is, of course, that natural selection has produced almost anything, has produced highly social species like dolphins and elephants and so on, and humans. And so it has produced a social nature which includes moral tendencies, or moral tendencies are an extension of that. So those are sort of the two basic views that we have. The one that I call Veneer theory is the first one. Veneer theory was very much defended by Huxley, who said morality is a departure from nature. It's uniquely human. It's calculated in the sense that you're not naturally moral, so you sort of calculate that it is best under the circumstances to act morally. So it's a very cynical view, really. And this one became extremely popular in the 70s and 80s in biology and outside of biology, and it was popularized by Dawkins, and so basically it became extremely popular at that time. I don't think it still is, but at that time it became a very popular view. And the metaphor that Huxley used, Huxley was contemporary with Darwin, and he's known as Darwin's bulldog. And you can look that up. Why is he known as he didn't act like a bulldog in the sense of being a pet, but more in the sense of attacking people who did agree with Darwin. And so he had this metaphor of the gardener in the garden. Basically, the garden wants to go wild. The garden likes to be out of control. That's how nature is. But we humans, we have the capacity to bring all of that disorganized natural tendencies under control, and that's our moral system. So our moral system is basically a constant fight against nature, because nature wants to drag us in the wrong direction. Nature wants to be selfish and nasty and aggressive and cheat and be dishonest and all those things, and we put a stop to that. So Dawkins is a real Huxleyan. Dawkins, this is the last line of the selfish gene. So if you first get a book that explains at great length that we are the products of our genes, we cannot do anything about it, we are robots, and genes are in charge, basically. And then at the last line, he gives us some hope. He says, we alone on Earth can rebel against the tyranny of the selfish replicators. So after all that talk about genes, he tells us, well, we can just as well throw them out of the window, we don't need them, and we can rebel against them. And he has that same view as Huxley, that we are the only ones who can do that. It's a very special capacity that we have. Giselin, biologist, philosopher, he even goes so far, and this became the most quoted line of that whole literature, scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed, which basically says that if you meet someone who's kind to you, don't trust that person, that's a hypocrite. He just tries to make a good impression on you, or he has other motives, because kind motives or altruistic motives don't really exist. They cannot exist. So I found a Monty Python sketch that illustrates this viewpoint. And so what you have here is a banker who's being approached for money for the orphanage. And this is a banker who has no concept of altruism. He cannot even imagine what that would be.
Can you just give me the pound?
Yes, but you see, I don't know what it's for.
Well, it's for the orphans.
Yes?
It's a gift.
A what?
A gift.
Oh, a gift! A tax dodge!
No.
I don't understand. Can you just explain exactly what you want?
Well, I want you to give me a pound, and then I go away and give it to the orphans.
Yes?
Well, that's it.
No, I don't follow this at all. I mean, I don't want to seem stupid, but it looks to me as though I'm a pound down on the whole deal.
Oh, yes, you are.
I am. Well, what is my incentive to give you the pound?
Well, the incentive is to make the orphans happy.
Happy? I'm quite sure you've got this right.
Yes, lots of people give me money.
What, just like that?
Yes, must be sick.
I don't suppose you could give me a list of their names and addresses.
No, I'll just go up to them in the street and ask.
Good Lord. That's the most exciting new idea I've heard in years.
Yeah, so the critical sentence here is, what is my incentive? So you would not do anything if there's not an incentive. And that became sort of the mantra in the 70s and the 80s, that real altruism cannot exist. Genuine altruism cannot really exist. Now, all of that changed, of course, around the year 2000. I don't know why, but at that time, humans became altruistic and cooperative, and people wrote books even like super cooperators and so on. There was still often the implication that in animals you would never find this, but that has changed also now. So basically, this is my summary of what I call Veneer theory. This is human nature, and at the core we are very bad, and around it we are not good, and then we have morality. Sort of as a funny aside, because I'm from the Catholic South, I call this a Calvinist model. It's basically because it's surrounded with this guilt and original sin. Because that's basically what it is. It is basically original sin translated into biology. So it's very pessimistic. And if we were like that, we would be mostly like psychopaths, basically. Because that's the psychopath. The psychopath doesn't have a lot of empathy and feelings for others, but is capable, a functioning psychopath is capable of functioning in society, even though he doesn't feel any of it, but he's capable of giving you the impression that he's normal. And so that's what this would be. It's a psychopathic model. Now Darwin, to his credit, Darwin, much smarter than any follower that he's had, I believe, Darwin had very different views, and he disagreed with Huxley, who defended him for all sorts of things. He disagreed with him on that point. And so Darwin wrote about morality extensively in The Descent of Man, which you should read. It's a very interesting book if you're interested in morality. He says it's a product of evolution. It's continuous with what other animals do. And it's based in the emotions. He was very much influenced by Adam Smith and David Hume. He was very much influenced by the Scots, and he spent some time in Scotland. And so the Scottish Enlightenment, he was very much affected by that. And so he had this more moral sentiment view of morality, which is now, among neuroscientists, is becoming the dominant view. And so Kant is sort of out and Hume is in with the neuroscientists. It's always hard to explain that to Kantian philosophers. The Kantian philosophers do their best to catch up with this, but it's not so easy. Or my sound is my sound variable? I noticed that it went away. So here you have a quote from Darwin's Descent of Man. Any animal, whatever, endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as soon as its intellectual powers had become as well developed or nearly as well developed as in man. And so basically he says if you get the intelligence of humans combined with the social instincts that you find in many animals, that's where you get morality. So a very different view. And this is now becoming basically the dominant view. So I often compare it with the top-down and the bottom-up view of morality. The top-down view, of course, the traditional one is that God gave us morality. We have sort of dropped that view. Most of us have. Although in the US you still find people who think without God there would be no morality. And then after that we got the philosophers who told us, no, it's not God, it's reason and logic who give us morality. And so basically the thinking there is that by reason and logic we get to moral principles, and these moral principles are then agreed upon by society and applied in the society. And so that's also a top-down view. And then more recently, a prominent atheist in the US, Sam Harris, has written a book, The Moral Landscape, which basically states that science is going to give us morality. Science is... This is very variable, Mike. I'm going to try it. Okay. Okay, is this better? Maybe. So science is going to give us morality. I'm very skeptical about science. Science is basically amoral. Science is occupied with how things work and how the world fits together and so on. The science is not really preoccupied at all with morality. And there's many scientists, of course, who have done very immoral things. I would not trust a scientist for a second to tell me what's moral or not moral, but that's what Harris said. But all of these are top-down views, basically. Whereas we are increasingly in neuroscience and in evolutionary biology thinking of bottom-up views, where we think, well, where do these tendencies come from? How did they arise during evolution? And then we get the moral question: how do we structure them in a moral system? So I want to go over several topics such as reconciliation, bonobos, empathy. I consider empathy a core capacity. Shall I work without a mic? I've given classes for bigger groups than this, so I can do that.
We can also use this one.
Or otherwise, this one works. All right. No. All right. Okay, I'll work on an empathy, consolation. I'll work self-awareness, altruism, and fairness. And so those are the topics I will go over. So my work on this kind of issue started with conflict resolution in the chimpanzees. This was something I did as a student, basically. I was still a student that I discovered that chimpanzees get together after fights. These are two chimpanzees who had a fight, males, and one of them is holding out a hand to the other and is begging the other for contact. And after this, they come together and they kiss and embrace each other, and that's called a reconciliation. And so I discovered that chimpanzees reconcile after fights. At the time, this was a very strange finding because everyone was preoccupied with conflict and who wins and who loses, basically. That's the most important part of a conflict. Do you win or do you lose? Winning is, of course, better than losing. But other than that, people had no big opinion about it. Whereas, of course, conflict disturbs relationships. And in social animals, that matters. But that was not a part of the storyline at the time. And so it took a while before people started to study reconciliation. I myself was the first one who set up systematic studies on it. But now we have maybe on animals alone we have maybe 200 studies, and you can imagine what's going on in the human literature. There's quite a bit on reconciliation. So this is a typical sequence. Here you have a male chimp who attacks a female, and the female comes back to the male. And she offers her hand for a hand kiss to the male, which is a way of testing in what kind of mood he is. And then they proceed to a mouse-to-mouse kiss, which is the typical way chimps reconcile. So that's how they do it. Before I get to the bonobos, let me say about this that reconciliation has been found now in not just like 30 primate species, but has been found outside of the primates in lions and in elephants and actually many animals who are cooperative, hyenas, wolves, and so on. And so it is actually a very common pattern. And I was recently, I'm just back from Denmark. I was recently at a meeting where someone was claiming it for fish. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's much more widespread than just the mammals. There are certainly birds who do it, and so it's a very widespread behavior pattern. And in bonobos are interesting, partly because of their high level of empathy that I'm really interested in, but also they reconcile with sex, and everyone finds that exciting and interesting. So bonobos, they do it in a way that we find very appealing, and that's why they're called the hippies of the primate world, basically. So bonobos, this is an evolutionary tree, as I learned it as a student. And basically, it's based on anthropology. It's based on bones and skulls and teeth, basically. That's what anthropologists do. And it says that humans are 25 million years separate from the apes. And maybe that view is still around, but it is certainly in anthropology, it may still be around because anthropologists are very slow to change their ways. But the DNA data says a totally different thing. The DNA data, when you compare DNA between species, which is the sort of standard criterion that we use nowadays. So if you ever hear that, let's say, elephants are related to hyraxes, which is the case, that's based on DNA. And if you compare the DNA of all these species, humans are right in the middle of the ape tree. Apes are different from monkeys. I hope you all know that apes have no tails, and you're basically apes. Monkeys is a very different category. And so these are the apes, and humans are right in the middle. In fact, in terms of DNA, a chimp is more like a human than a chimp is like a gorilla. So people found that very hard to digest and objected to it. And anthropologists, of course, they didn't like it very much. And the anthropologists, of course, they had made a lot of assumptions about human uniqueness. We are very quick to assume human uniqueness. And they had, for example, the anthropologists, they would say, humans walk on two legs. That's a big deal. That's a very big distinction. But chickens walk on two legs. Penguins walk on two legs. It's really not such a big deal. But they had made a big deal out of it. And apes, under certain circumstances, apes can walk on two legs very well. So here you have, for example, the bonobos. The bonobos are special among the apes because their legs are long, and so strong that you cannot even imagine how strong they are. But the legs are little short legs. And bonobos have made that shift to some degree. And if you compare bonobos with Ardipithecus, which is an ancestral type, is a bipedal ape, so it's an ancestor of us. Ardipithecus was discovered just 2 years ago and lived 4.4 million years ago. And if you compare these two, it's almost exactly the same. Even the brain size is the same. This is between bonobos and Ardipithecus. When Ardipithecus was discovered, people said, well, Ardipithecus is very different from the apes because Ardipithecus is peaceful. Ardipithecus has reduced canine teeth, which means it didn't fight as much. But bonobos have reduced canine teeth, and bonobos look exactly like Ardipithecus. And so the bonobo was overlooked. And that's a sort of general tendency in anthropology. They focus on the chimpanzee as an ancestral type. Recently, for example, if you have followed this debate, I think it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, a paper came out on violence levels in wild chimpanzees. Did anyone read that paper?
Yeah.
Or about the paper?
About murder.
Huh?
That they murder each other.
They murder each other. That's an even stronger word. Yeah. So they murder each other. And so this is based on a paper that appeared in Nature, where they reviewed all the fieldwork on bonobos and all the fieldwork on chimpanzees. And they discovered that we knew that for a long time, that they documented that chimpanzees kill each other in the wild. I think they had 150 suspected cases of one chimp killing another chimp. They had one suspected case for the bonobos, and I know that case, and I doubt it very much. So in bonobos, there's basically nothing. What do the media do? The media say, well, we are related to murderous apes. But we're also related to a very peaceful ape, the bonobo. So if you look at the evolutionary tree that I showed, the bonobo and the chimp, their split is more recent. And so the bonobo and the chimp are exactly equally closely or distantly related to us. And there's no reason to focus on the chimp. But the anthropologists have chosen to focus on chimps. And as a result, the bonobo is barely considered. The bonobo has female dominance. That's not good. They're very peaceful. That's not good. They have a bunch of characteristics that don't fit in the scenarios that anthropologists have developed, which scenarios are basically that we got where we are as a human species by wiping out everybody else. We are healthy and aggressive, and we wiped out the Neanderthals, so we wiped out everybody, basically. But we also know, I don't know if you followed that debate, but the Neanderthals, we here in the audience, we have about 4% Neanderthal genes. How did they get into us? Not by fighting. It's the opposite thing. So that would be the bonobo strategy. Rape. Could be. Given the size of the Neanderthals, I doubt it, that we got to that point. Neanderthals were pretty hefty individuals. So I'm not convinced that we wiped them out. I'm not convinced that we raped them. I think humans probably fell in love with Neanderthals to some degree. So bonobos, they make peace by having sex. And I hope that I have some videos of that. Here we have a video. So this is a video that comes from the sanctuary on bonobos that exists in Shasta. It's actually very sad that we have that sanctuary. It's the only one in the world. And it's because there's bushmeat hunting on all the apes. And so bonobos, they lose their lives to poachers. The poachers are not particularly interested in the baby bonobos that cling to the mothers, and they take those away. They're not interested in selling them as meat, and so they take them away and they bring them to the market to sell them live as pets. And then they're very often confiscated and brought to the sanctuary where they're raised by humans. So these are traumatized little bonobos who live there. And I'm just going to show you a video that shows how you can get sex among bonobos by giving them food. Bonobos react to food as all other animals do by competing over it, but they turn the competition immediately into sex. And so you don't even get to see competition. What you get to see is sexual behavior. So here the bonobos are waiting. for their food. They live in a forest. And now the food has arrived and they have sex. So that's the bonobo way, the sort of multitasking here. and it's very efficient because, as I said, until now we have no documented cases of one bonobo killing another one. So aggression does occur, but it's not very frequent and it's certainly not very intense in the terms of escalation. So here you get a reconciliation in a river at the same sanctuary. So you will see a little fight and a reconciliation. And that's really all it is. So people think, of course, that bonobos have sex all the time, hours long. Like an orgy or something like that, but it's more like a handshake. It's more like a 10-second deal. So it's a brief contact, sometimes a bit longer, but it's really all built into their social life. So let me say a few things about empathy. The issue of reconciliation that I just mentioned is of course relevant for moral systems, because I look at moral systems as systems that keep communities together. They're very community-oriented, and they often place the community above the individual. And so keeping harmony and peace in the community is part of reconciliation behavior and is part of the moral system, and I think these things are related. But if there's one capacity that is absolutely critical for morality, it's empathy. Because empathy makes us interested in others, in their feelings and in their situation. And without that, there's no way you could build a moral system, at least not one that resembles the ones that we have. And so empathy is critical, and empathy is defined here in the dictionary as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So you immediately see the two components of empathy. You see the cognitive component and the emotional component. And in psychology, and maybe also in philosophy and other areas, we tend to emphasize the cognitive part. And so if you ask an average psychologist, what is the critical capacity for empathy, he will say, you need to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. You need to imagine the situation of somebody else. Simulation theory, that kind of things are around. But all of these capacities come online later in your life. To imagine the situation of somebody else is not something that an infant does or a toddler. But those capacities are often mentioned. And no one would say that a toddler has no empathy. So, for example, babies, human babies, they cry when they hear other babies cry. It's an act of empathy. Sometimes a whole airplane full of babies crying. So that response, and it has been tested against other sounds. It's not just noise. You can test these babies against sounds of vacuum cleaners or cars or screaming chimpanzees or loud TV. No. Specifically, the crying of another baby makes them cry. And girl babies already do this more than boy babies. And so the sex difference in empathy is already visible on the first day of life. So that's called emotional contagion, and emotional contagion is sort of the underpinning basis of empathy. So I call that the first channel, the body channel. The body channel of empathy is that you are connected to others through bodies and voices and facial expressions. You synchronize with others, you have mimicry going on. You talk with a sad person, you will be looking sad. You talk with a laughing person, you will be laughing. And so that's the synchronization and the basis of empathy. And that's how it starts. And then later we add a second layer, and that's what I call the cognitive channel, where you now set yourself apart from the other. So you make a distinction between the situation of the other and that of your own, which allows you to take the perspective of the other. And so perspective taking, that's a more complex capacity. And the claims for that in animals are more limited than for the first channel. So we study the body synchronization by looking at yawn contagion. If you're close to someone who's yawning, you're going to be yawning, if you have empathy at least. And we study that in our chimpanzees. And so one way we do that is we have a chimpanzee who stares at a screen on which he sees an animated head of a chimp yawning. So that's a response that has also now been tested with dogs, and so you can do that at home with your dog. Dogs yawn when the owners yawn. And all of these responses are biased. So here you have a female who looks at an iPod on which we show yawn videos. And it's going to be looped. But the interesting part here is that we have videos of chimpanzees that she knows, which is the in-group, and we have videos of chimps that she doesn't know, which is the out-group. And so she has two categories of individuals that she looks at yawning, and she's only affected, the effect that we measure only occurs for the in-group. So that's a general thing for all empathy studies, in humans and animals, is that it is more triggered by individuals who are familiar and similar. Which has a flip side, of course, is that we have trouble having empathy for outsiders and for strangers. And so this particular effect has also been found in human yawn studies. So there's a study in Italy that was done where they measured yawning in waiting rooms and train stations and so on, and they then found that if you stand next to a stranger who's yawning, you're unaffected. You stand next to your wife and children and who are yawning, and you're going to be affected by it. And so yawning is one of those, and that's sort of a general marker of all the empathy. Because you could think maybe this chimp is just opening her mouth, making yawning movements because she sees somebody opening their mouth, and so it's pure mimicry. But there's more going on. There's an identification going on with the other, and that's more with in-group than with out-group. And that's also why dog yawning, that's only with the owners that they do that. So they feel close to the owner, and that